What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome again to Call to Communion. This is the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith, maybe you just don't know where to turn to get those answers. Well, you can turn to us. And here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, the phone number 833-288-EWTN. Michael Birchfield is our producer. Matt Kabinski is handling the phones today. He'll be the first voice that you hear when you call in. Jeff Burson is on social media, so he will be glad to post those questions that you post on YouTube and Facebook. He'll pass those on to us. We'll get them on the air and hopefully get them answered for you very quickly. I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Doing great. How are you, my friend?
You know, I'm hanging in there. Thank you.
Glad to hear that. Here is a question we received. This is a text from Travis. As a habit now, how often should I go to confession?
Thanks, Travis. I appreciate it. So the bishops of the United States recommend monthly confession.
Okay.
Okay. The practice in my family is closer to weekly confession, and I think, you know, depending on your state of life and family status and so forth, that can be indicated. Pope John Paul II went every day.
Wow.
Right, which I don't recommend, honestly. You're not the Pope, and neither am I. And I think if most people went every day, it would probably be tilting over into scrupulosity.
Could be.
You know, but regularly is the operative word here.
Okay, very good. Here's one now from Matt in Kansas who says, hey, love your show. Here's my question. I know that there is no sadness in heaven, but if I am fortunate enough to make it there, only to realize that a loved one didn't make it to heaven, how is it that this would not make me sad? Thanks, Matt in Kansas.
Okay, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. So there's several things to consider here. One of them is what does the happiness of heaven consist? Okay, and what the Church teaches, what Scripture teaches, is that the happiness of heaven is the immediate and intuitive knowledge of the divine essence. Okay, let me unpack that a little bit. Right now, we don't have an immediate and intuitive knowledge of the divine essence. Our knowledge of God and His essence is remote, all right? And we know that God exists, all right? We know from the natural world, from philosophy. We know from divine revelation that God exists, that He loves us, that He cares for us, and so forth. But we don't know Him as He is in Himself. We know some things about Him, okay? But we don't have that direct and intuitive knowledge of God. And intuitive is a big part of this, too. So what is intuitive knowledge? Well, intuitive are things that I don't have to reason to know. Like, I know intuitively, like my own state of consciousness, for instance.
Sure.
I mean, it's just immediately evident to me. That's how intimately we will know God. St. Paul says that we will know Him even as we're fully known. That's some pretty serious intimacy right there. That's what we call the beatific vision. Now, God is different from all other beings, all right, in that He is the ground and the source of everything that is good. Okay, so whenever you find something that you are attracted to, that's pleasant, that's beautiful, that's good, you are in a created and sort of participatory way, in an indirect way, engaging something that comes from the very nature and being and essence of God, all right? And, you know, I'm drinking a cup of green tea. Well, green tea is good stuff, right? But it's only good because God is good and God made green tea, all right? And if I had a quantitative infinity of all the sort of finite goods that I might encounter in the material universe and stacked them all up, all right, they still wouldn't equal the infinite goodness of God's very own essence and nature, okay? Once I encounter that good, that ultimate good, it is the fulfillment of all desire. There's literally nothing left to be desired, all right? And we will continue to enjoy created being, right, for the sake of God. All right, so I'll still like my wife and my kids and, whatever else is available to me in heaven. But for the sake of God and in God will I like all these things. Will I love them and rejoice in them because they are gifts from God. But it's ultimately God that's the fulfillment of all desire. So there can be nothing lacking in our state of subjective happiness at that point. Like once the will immediately encounters the divine nature and essence, what could draw you away from that? Nothing. 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 Nothing.
Nothing? Nothing.
Right. Now, one of the things that we don't see, right, in the nature of God right now is how to make sense of loss and suffering. Sometimes we do, but a lot of times we don't. But we know that God allows these things in His providence because He intends to bring out of them a greater good. Right now we may not see that greater good. In heaven we will. And so what seems irreconcilable or contradictory, like our eternal blessedness and the knowledge of the loss of someone that we cared about, all right, we don't see how those things can be reconciled. Now, in heaven we will see the reconciliation because we'll see we'll see the sense of them revealed in the divine essence. All right. So I can't explain to you how that reconciliation will be made known to you, just that it will be made known to you in such a way that there will be nothing lacking in your experience of perfect bliss.
Very good. Hey, we thank you so much for that question. It was a great one. When we come back, we'll be talking with Jennifer in Worthington, Ohio. We also have some texts coming in and a couple of phone lines open for you right now. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Call to Communion in progress here on EWTN.
Sharing the fullness of the Catholic faith. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986. This is Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
You know, we talk an awful lot about trust on EWTN and on this program. Well, let me tell you, you can trust the news that you see on EWTN News Nightly. Lauren Ashburn and the wonderful team of Washington, D.C. correspondents and really correspondents from all over the world work very, very hard to get you all the news that is going to affect you and your life. So do check it out tonight, 9 p.m. on EWTN. That's EWTN News Nightly with Lauren Ashburn. If you're ready now, let's get to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin here with Jennifer in Worthington, Ohio, listening to us on St. Gabriel Radio, AM 820. Hello, Jennifer. What's on your mind today?
Hello, and thank you. My 17-year-old daughter attends a non-Catholic Christian school. And yesterday, the headmaster had a discussion, and he said that women cannot be in any leadership positions anywhere, in the church or outside the church. And he also said that
couldn't or shouldn't?
Should not.
Should not
be in a leadership.
Okay,
yeah, right.
All right, I understand that.
And he said that his thinking is in line with Catholic teaching. My daughter and a couple others in the school are Catholic. I have two questions. Number one, just in general, how can we respond to that? And then number two, in particular, how can we relate to Paul's, where he says in 1 Corinthians 14, 33 to 35, he says that women must be silent in churches. They're not permitted to speak. And if they want to know something, they should ask their husbands at home. And those are my questions. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thanks. Well, first of all, your non-Catholic headmaster's position is not shared by the Catholic Church either in the present day or historically. And the number of women in significant leadership roles within Catholicism is quite large. So, you know, a very important female person in the Catholic Church is the Blessed Virgin Mary, all right, apart from whose intercession we would all be sunk. All right, and so she's an incredibly important person, Queen of Heaven. All right. Within the church militant, that's those of us that are alive and kicking around on planet Earth today. I mean, I'm thinking about an august body like the International Theological Commission, which advises the Pope and the Vatican on matters of theology, has a number of very prominent women, both religious and lay, on that commission, appointed directly by the Pope. The role of Catholic women religious in education, healthcare, advocacy for the poor, you name it. I mean, think of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, for instance. You know, it's just mammoth. And women religious, of course, have been part of the Church's constitution from the very beginning. We read about the Order of Widows in St. Paul's epistles, and they, of course, have had a significant role in church life for millennia. And in fact, one of the things that was interesting, made Catholicism controversial in the very early centuries, is that in many ancient cultures, and including in European barbaric, Saxon, Frankish culture prior to the advent of Catholicism, marriage was something over which women exercised very little control outside of Catholicism, and women were essentially property to be disposed of by their fathers or their husbands, and the idea that a woman would have to give consent in order to be validly married was something foreign to their experience. But the Catholic Church taught that a woman can withhold her consent to a marriage, and that will and forced marriage is not valid marriage. Okay, and there were women who were martyred in antiquity, like Lucy and Agatha and so forth, who preferred to consecrate their virginity to Christ rather than to marry, and they were martyred for it. And the Church venerates their example of heroic dedication to the gospel, even to the extent of separating from family bonds and blood and so forth, as Jesus himself said in the gospel when he says, if anyone loves husband or wife or father or mother or fields or lands or children or very his own life more than me, he's not worthy of me. The Church always takes that commitment of consecrated life, and when you think about it, the kind of radical freedom that implies about the dignity and the nature of the human person, very, very seriously, applying it with equal dignity to men and women. We have, in my own diocese of Birmingham, Alabama, we have far more women administrators in education than we do men. We have women working in the ministry of local parishes, of schools, of Catholic institutions and hospitals and so forth, teachers. We have canonists that are women that make judgments for the marriage tribunals and other tribunals and so forth. We have a woman in my diocese who's a very leading internationally recognized canonist, Mother Angelica, who I was just going to say. Tom's sitting here giving me the eye. I was saving the trump card for the end there, Tom.
Jennifer, you could certainly ask that headmaster, who founded the world's largest Catholic media network? The world's largest.
Well, I'm getting around to that because the headmaster's position is he's not making a claim about what happens in Catholicism. He's making a claim about what he thinks is normative, what ought to happen. All right. He is a chauvinist, essentially, who's trying to exclude women from any position of leadership at all, based on passages like this from St. Paul and 1 Corinthians that have been taken, I believe, out of context, and certainly out of the historic tradition of the Catholic Church. Now, within Catholicism, there is no doubt that there is a historic tradition that differentiates the roles of men and women, particularly in family life with respect to authority. Mm-hmm. All right, and you find sometimes some rather strongly worded statements about paternal authority and husband's authority and so forth up until the Second Vatican Council. So there's a basis for that in the tradition. The last document from the magisterium I remember that sort of clearly enunciated difference of role and authority within family life would be Casti Connubii by Pius XI, which repeats the traditional teaching very much in the kind of language that St. Paul would use. I think that since the Council, the Church and the Magisterium, in particular Pope John Paul II, has a more nuanced interpretation of that. And this is getting around to your final question about how are we to understand 1 Corinthians 14 and similar passages in the modern era. A good resource, especially for your daughter, there's a book by Erica Bacciocchi called Women, Sex, and the Church, A Case for Catholic Teaching, all right, which you might want to reference. Also, John Paul II's encyclical on the dignity of women. It's what dignitatis mulierum or
I
mulierum
believe so. Yeah,
dignitatis.
that's it.
And essentially it's this, okay? The modern feminist movement, especially second wave feminism, takes the position that biological sex and gender are two different realities. All right, that's Simone de Beauvoir and classic feminism takes the position that, Beauvoir would say a person is not born but becomes a woman. And what she meant by that wasn't a denial of the reality of biological sex, but there was all this baggage that would come associated with gender identity that's culturally conditioned and kind of foisted on the society. And that conviction, which is an ideological conviction, has so overwhelmed the feminist movement that it's almost heresy in modern secular feminism to suggest that men and women are different or that they have different giftings that may be grounded in their biology. All right. Now that's honestly, it's kind of a lunatic position to take, all right, because both in our experience and empirically in the laboratory and all the way down to the level of the DNA, men and women are not the same. They're different, all right, but they're equal in dignity, okay? And so the position of the modern Catholic Church is genuine feminism does not require that we force all women to be men. And that's kind of where second wave secular feminism goes. It means that equality for women has to mean that men and women operate in the same spaces with the same kind of tasks, irrespective of their biology. All right, and that's Erica Bacciocchi and others argue that's really deeply unfair to women because, women have a biological clock with respect to child rearing that men don't have. So insisting that they compete with men in a male-dominated realm often results in their having to put off decisions of child rearing, and then the time runs out and they realize, okay, I've made it to the top of the corporate ladder, but I'm childless and I'm lonely.
Yeah.
So genuine feminism is not how can I get more women to behave like men, but how could I actually challenge the civil order and change culture in a way that would enable women to use all of their intellectual, spiritual, cultural, emotional gifts in a way that doesn't violate their intrinsic femininity and particularly their capacity to bear children, which is a huge biological burden that God has placed on them. Okay. Now, when it comes down to family life, I will tell you how I handle this personally as a dad who regards my wife as equal dignity with myself. I recognize that just sociologically, fathers have a kind of influence over the life of their family that mothers don't have. Mothers have a kind of influence over the life of their family that fathers don't have, And typically, not in every case, typically women are more nurturing. If my 9-year-old scrapes his knee or busts his toe, there's no doubt in my mind who he's running to first.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of times when my wife, she wants the kids to do something, and she's having a hard time getting them to comply, she appeals to me. She says, David, come here and make the kids do X, Y, and Z. All right? Do I bring an authority to bear in that situation that she's having trouble exercising? The answer to that question is yes. In what way am I bringing it? As a service to my wife, right? I can step in sometimes and bring a weight of authority to a situation that's helpful to her. All right, and that's what it is. It's the authority of service. All right, it's not the authority of domination. All right, and it's one that regards the equal dignity of men and women, but recognizing that they have different gifts, they have different talents. All of them are necessary for the flourishing of the family and for the kingdom of God and for civil society.
Beautiful. Jennifer, thank you so much for your call. That opens up a line for you now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to Spirit Lake, Iowa now and talk with Andrew. Andrew is 10 years old. He likes to check us out via podcasting. Hey, Andrew, what's your question today?
Why did God put demons on the earth?
Thanks, Andrew. I appreciate the question. To test us so that we will learn to rely on God's mercy and grace. God could have created all of us just immediately in heaven without our having to experience any of the difficulties of life, all right? whether those difficulties be demons or physical sickness or whatever. But God created a world in which we would find it necessary to call out to Him for help, all right, and to rely on His grace and to grow in our spiritual life, because that too is valuable to God. So He allows these and other challenges so that we might learn to rely upon Him in grace.
There you go, Andrew. Thanks for calling. Our phone number here, 833-288-EWTN. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN Radio. And by the way, if you're watching us on TV today, you too can join in by sending us an email, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Let's go to Aaron now in Leesburg, Virginia, checking us out via Amazon Echo. Hey there, Aaron, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
My question is, how can I be involved in some ecumenical events that happen in my community, but just go there not to give up my Catholic principles, but to sort of add to it?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it. So I think it's very important that you have clear in your own mind what your obligations are as a Catholic, and that you not do anything that would contravene those. So, for instance, you would not be able to participate in an ecumenical communion service or Lord's Supper, for instance.
Right.
That's because the Eucharist is the sign and the bond of the Church's unity. So it's only the valid Catholic Eucharist that you can participate in. And there might be other religious services whose expression or formulation explicitly contradicts some point of Catholic teaching. Like, say, for instance, you might some Episcopal or United Methodist congregation that was celebrating a so-called gay marriage. You couldn't participate in something like that because it contradicts the very nature and essence and the meaning of the sacrament of matrimony. But barring those kinds of exceptions, there are a lot of places where Catholic and non-Catholic peoples agree on matters of the moral life, religious liberty, the dignity of the human person, and provided it's grounded in or based in those principles or those elements of truth and sanctification that we share, then there's every reason in the world to celebrate those commonalities. The pro-life movement has long been a privileged space for ecumenical engagement. We have a crisis pregnancy center here in Birmingham that's founded and run by Catholics, but Protestants are some of our greatest benefactors because they value the same ministry, saving babies and helping mothers. So really, as long as there's something that we share and conviction that's good, we can celebrate that all day long. And it can be fruitful also to have public discussions not only of our similarities, but also of our differences, not in a polemical way, not, to beat the other guy up and tell him why he's wrong, but just to, lay out, here's what unites us and here's what separates us. And let's see how we can overcome the latter and expand the realm of the former.
Sounds good. Aaron, thank you so much for your call. Here's a quick email from Noel. Is St. Thomas's belief correct that God does choose who will be saved? Please explain. Thanks.
Yeah, that's correct. Absolutely. This is the doctrine of predestination, which is a Catholic doctrine and a biblical doctrine. So sometimes people get hung up on this because they confuse the Catholic doctrine of predestination with the Protestant or Calvinist doctrine, which is false and the Church rejects. There are a lot of distinctions between the two, but the essence of the Catholic doctrine of predestination is that it's God who chooses us, not we who choose God. Okay? The idea that, God just sort of, without differentiation, chooses the human race generally, and that it's up to us to respond, and then He then responds by giving us grace. That's the heresy of semi-Pelagianism, which was condemned at the Synod of Orange in 529 A.D. God gives the grace necessary and efficient for salvation to those whom He knows will be saved. Why He gives it to some and not others is something I don't have time to get into because I hear the music coming. But there's more than one opinion about that in Catholicism, and there's a lot of room for theological speculation. If it's not God who chooses, then essentially something is left to my moral effort and my free will. That's not the way it works.
We'll be right back.
What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders. 1-833-288-EWTN. 1-833-288-3986.
Quite a few calls coming in today, but we have a line open for you right now, 833-288-EWTN. Let's continue here with Roseanne driving through Tennessee, listening to us via Sirius XM 130. Hello, Roseanne. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Hey, my husband was listening to your show, Dr. Anders, the other day, and he thought he heard you say that Mary did not give Jesus, she did not have a vaginal birth, and that was dogma. Did he misunderstand you, I hope?
No, he did not misunderstand me. That's a dogma of the Catholic Church, and you can find it referenced in paragraph 499 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And then, for more lengthy discussion, you might consult the encyclopedia, the Catholic Encyclopedia on the dogma of Mary's perpetual virginity. Because they're very specific about what perpetual virginity means. It's not just that she never had conjugal relations with a man, but also that her biological integrity was maintained even in the process of parturition. So it was a miraculous birth. That's correct, and that is a dogma of the Church.
Okay, there you go. Roseanne, thank you so much for your call. Here's an email now from Chris from Texas, who says, "Hey, Dr. Anders, I was scrolling through a religious discussion group online. I saw a really interesting question brought up in the context of reconciliation between Eastern Orthodox and our church, the Catholic Church. So, do Sedevacantist churches have any valid sacraments? Are they in a similar state as the Orthodox, not in communion with Rome? Thanks, love your show, Chris."
Right. Well, you can't necessarily generalize about every Sedevacantist group. Okay.
What is a Sedevacantist?
Right. A Sedevacantist is a non-Catholic religious movement of people that claim to be Catholic, but not only do they refuse obedience to the Roman Pontiff, to the Holy Father, they deny there even is one. All right. And there are some of these groups that maintain that while they recognize the office of the papacy was instituted by Christ, they maintain that the office has effectively been vacant, hence vacantus.
Empty chair,
right? Empty chair, since the pontificate of Pius XII. So they don't recognize the validity of John the 23rd's papal election, or Paul VI, or any of the subsequent popes down to the present chair of St. Peter, Pope Francis. So as to whether or not they have valid sacraments, well, that judgment needs to be made by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith on a case-by-case basis. All right. So there are those that do have valid sacraments, as I understand, but there are others where the validity of their sacraments is in question. All right. And so this is, anytime someone presents themselves as a validly ordained priest, but they're not in obedience to the Roman Pontiff, and they wish to be reconciled to the Church is going to look at their claim to valid ordination on a case-by-case basis and determine whether or not they actually have valid sacraments.
Very good. Thank you for your question. Our phone number here, 833-288-EWTN. Let's go now to Marianne in Dickinson, North Dakota, Dickinson, North Dakota, checking us out today on Real Presence Radio. Marianne, what's on your mind today?
My question is in regards to a mixed marriage. There was somebody called in last evening. The family called in about their daughter marrying a non-Catholic. Anyway, in a mixed marriage, don't both parties promise to raise the children in the Catholic faith?
Yeah, thank you. That used to be the case in canon law. That if a Catholic person wanted to marry a non-Catholic person, that the priest would not officiate at the wedding unless both parties promised to raise children Catholic. My understanding is now that the non-Catholic party is not required to promise to raise the kids Catholic, but does have to recognize and understand the Catholic party's moral obligation to do so.
Okay.
All right. So it doesn't mean that the obligation to raise Catholic kids has gone away. Basically, the burden for fulfilling that promise falls predominantly on the Catholic parent. And if a non-Catholic parent suggested that he or she was going to actively frustrate the Catholic parent's obligation to raise the children Catholic, then that would be a serious problem.
Okay, very good. Marianne, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. Here's an email from John in Texas. Why did Jesus, after the resurrection, tell Mary, "Don't touch me, I have not risen to my Father yet"? But then he tells Thomas to go ahead and probe the nail marks and his side.
Yeah, well, I think there are two different kinds of touching going on here. Right? In Thomas's case, it was evidence of the bodily resurrection that he wanted to elicit. I mean, he was demonstrating rather.
Right,
He wanted to retrieve from Thomas that act of faith in his messiahship and his divinity and his authority that tangible proof of the resurrection would elicit. All right. In the case of Mary, she had no doubts that he was raised from the dead. That wasn't in question. All right. And he pointed out that, look, my presence with you now, all right, what's most important is my sacramental presence with you in the Eucharist, in the church, and my ascension into heaven is an essential part of the fulfilling of God's plan for the gospel throughout the whole world. You know, when Pilate said to Jesus, "Are you a king?" Jesus' answer was that my kingdom is not of this world. And St. Paul tells us that we're to set our hearts not on things below, but on heaven, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. If Jesus were sitting on a throne in Jerusalem right now, ruling over a geopolitical kingdom, the nature of our adherence to the Catholic faith or to Christ would be very, very different. All right, it's precisely because he's ascended into heaven. All right, and the nature of his kingdom is otherworldly and not the kingdom of this world, that our adherence to the Catholic faith is in the domain of the ethical and of charity and of faith, rather than political domination or coercion.
Very good. John, thank you for your email. If you'd like to send us an email for a future program, the address is ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Let's go now to Nicholas in Canton, Ohio, listening also on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I'm looking for a solid explanation of why women can't become priests.
Okay, thanks. Women cannot become priests for a reason that is very similar to why men cannot become mothers, all right, or women cannot become fathers. That the priest stands in relationship to the church as a husband to a bride and a father to a family, all right, and it's not that women, the priesthood is not some sort of utilitarian function that can be fulfilled just in virtue of doing tasks, all right? There are tasks that a priest has to do, like celebrating the sacraments. That's the principal one, all right? But the priesthood is also not only about what a priest does, but about who a priest is, all right? Because the priest is an icon, a type of Christ and his relationship to the church, and that's essential to the nature of a priest, all right? There's a kind of priesthood that devolves to paternity in general, all right? When you look in the Old Testament, fathers of families had a particular role in offering sacrifice and in mediating the divine covenant to their children and to their families in virtue of their paternity, all right? And the church is like a great big family. And to deny that men and women are different, not unequal, right, but different. They have different competencies and they have different gifts. I mean, I can't be a mother. And if I lost my wife and I tried to pick up her job, I could do a lot of the same functions. I could do a lot of the same functions, but they wouldn't have the same character.
Of course not.
Because I'm not a woman and I can't be a mother. I could try all day long and it's not going to happen, all right? And my wife couldn't be a father. She could try all day long. She's not going to be a father.
That's it. Thank you so much for your question. We do appreciate it. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. This program is specifically for non-Catholics. So if you're not a Catholic, you're thinking about it, and maybe there's something keeping you from becoming a Catholic, let's talk about that at 833-288-EWTN, 833-288-3986. Here is Clara now in St. Petersburg, Florida, listening on Peace Be With You Radio. Hello, Clara. What's on your mind today?
Hi. I was listening, and I heard the lady that called in about the birth of Christ being a virgin birth and that it was part of the Catholic dogma. I have a two-part question. First of all, what is a dogma? I don't know what that is. And the other thing is, if it was a virgin birth, in my knowing, a birth, how was Jesus born then?
All right, thanks. So I appreciate the question, Clara. A dogma is a doctrine, a teaching, that that all Christians are bound to believe by divine authority. All right? So God has revealed it as true, and we have a moral obligation to believe what God has revealed because God is trustworthy. All right? That's what a dogma is. The dogmas of the church are things generally that the church has formally defined as necessary or essential parts of Christian belief. All right? Not every doctrine is a dogma, and there are particular teachings in Christianity that could be true. It's not the fact that they're not dogma doesn't make them untrue, but they've never been formally identified by the teaching office of the church as absolutely necessary for Christian identity. Right? And there are positions within Catholicism about which Catholics can take different points of view. They can disagree. All right? Dogmas are not things they can disagree about. The paradigm example of a dogma would be the dogma of the Trinity, the doctrine of the Blessed Trinity. There are no two views on the Trinity. If you take a second view, if you take a dissenting view, you're no longer Catholic in your faith. All right? Catholics believe in the Trinity. Period.
The end.
That's what a dogma is. The doctrine of Mary's perpetual virginity is also a dogma. All right, you can't call yourself a Catholic and claim to have the Catholic faith and deny a dogma. So, in terms of the actual mechanism of Jesus' birth, it was a miraculous parturition where he passed through the uterus in a miraculous manner that left the physical integrity of the Blessed Virgin intact.
That's all there is to it. Clara, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Here's an interesting question. This is from Miriam via email, and this is one of those subjects that pops up quite a bit with non-Catholics. They'll say, well, what about this? Well, what about this? So here's Miriam's question. Would you please tell us about the Inquisition? I would love to be able to respond in an educated manner when asked. Thanks and God bless.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, the first thing to know about the Inquisition is there wasn't just one. There was more than one Inquisition. And we have to distinguish the Roman Inquisition from the Spanish Inquisition. The Roman Inquisition was an office that was set up by the Vatican, by the Chair of St. Peter, to bring due process and justice and fairness and standards of evidence and so forth to bear in the prosecution of heretics. And that was its mandate, because keeping in mind that in pre-modern society, and this is not just true of Christianity, this is true of just about every religious culture throughout the entire world. There's very little distinction between the practice of religion and one's conception of the civil order as such. Okay, and so minority groups, whether religious or otherwise, have often had to suffer at the hands of the majority, and that was true in medieval Europe as well, especially in the early days of the conversion of the empire and conversion of the West, and a culture that was a pre-Christian culture that was very comfortable with things like trial by ordeal, a lot of barbaric customs, and some of those got imported into early, Frankish, Celtic, and Saxon Catholicism in a way that was unjust. And the Catholic Church says, well, that's terrible. We can't have pogroms and plunging heretics into boiling oil and stuff like that. We recognize that Catholics have an obligation to hold the same faith, and so the end of seeking unity in the faith, and even to the point of imposing church discipline to do so, is a worthy and noble end, but has to be done in a fair-minded way. All right, and so the Inquisition was set up actually to prevent abuses, not to create them. This is the Roman Inquisition I'm talking about, not the Spanish Inquisition. Right. And they did such a good job at that, in fact, that we have cases in the Middle Ages of people who were accused of merely civil crimes, theft, murder, whatnot, who would deliberately commit heresy so they could have their trials transferred into inquisitorial courts, because the inquisitorial courts were viewed as much more fair-minded and civil and rational than the secular courts. Okay, now the Spanish Inquisition was set up by Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain to enforce Catholic orthodoxy on their particular kingdom, and it also became an engine of the monarchy and of the aristocracy and of the civil power in ways that were more conducive to abuse. All right. Now, the extent of those abuses is a matter of some historical controversy, and that doesn't justify any abuse. Any abuse is deplorable, but it wasn't like the Monty Python skit.
Glad to hear that. Wow. Thank you so much for your question, Miriam. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Got a text here from Aura checking us out today on YouTube. Aura says, did Joseph go with Our Lady to visit Elizabeth? And if he did, how come he doubted Mary's pregnancy afterwards?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm not aware that there's revelation on that one way or the other, and I don't know of any tradition that addresses the question of whether or not Joseph accompanied Our Lady to visit Elizabeth, or even the exact breakdown in terms of timing. Now, it's not that Joseph doubted. Joseph didn't doubt. Okay, Joseph found out that Mary was pregnant, and he assumed, as was rational, that she got pregnant in the normal way. And so that was problematic, okay? And so that's why he was, well, maybe I should call this thing off. And then, of course, he got visited by the angel who said, nope, Joseph, not in the normal way. This is a miraculous conception, and it's in accord with the plan of God, and God's desire is that you take Mary home to be your wife. He never doubted for a second. He went, oh, that's the way it is? I'm on board.
So be it. Okay. Thank you so much for your question, Aura. Our phone number here, 833-288-EWTN. We do have a line open for you, 833-288-3986. Call to Communion on EWTN. Question here from Jay, who says, can Catholics attend a non-Catholic funeral?
Yeah, sure they can. Sure they can.
No big deal.
Yeah, the only thing you can't do, you can't go and receive the putative sacraments of a non-Catholic church. But in terms of attending the funeral, yeah, absolutely.
Very good. An email now from Al in Greenville, South Carolina. He says, good day. I wanted to ask if there was sin in heaven when the angels rejected God when they saw his plan for humanity. Wouldn't the angels have sinned since they rejected God at that time? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So here's the distinction we need to draw. Are we talking about heaven as the abode of God and the angels? Or are we talking about the reward of heaven, which is the reward of the just, which consists in the beatific vision? Okay, the angels at the moment of their creation were not admitted to the beatific vision immediately upon creation. All right, it was necessary for them to merit eternal salvation, and so they were created like Adam and Eve. The angels were created in grace, and then the holy angels withstood their moral testing, and they believed God and trusted him, and in that second, they merited eternal salvation and passed immediately to the beatific vision. The angels that disobeyed God in pride and resisted the divine will never experienced the beatific vision. All right? And so heaven in that sense, heaven as the reward of the just, wasn't something that they lost because they never had it.
Okay. Very good. Appreciate your question there, and thank you for checking in with us today, Jay. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Steve sent us an email, says, could you please help me counter my friend's argument that the Catholic Church is not the church that Jesus started in the year 33? He believes that there should be no denominations, thus all congregations should be non-denominational. What say you?
Seems like a non sequitur.
Kinda.
All right. So I think that he's correct in saying that there ought not to be denominations. Okay. Meaning that all Christians, as St. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10, all Christians have to agree with one another on the content of the faith. Okay. And Jesus prays for the same thing in John 17, that those who believe in him might be one. Okay. Well, guess what? You're not going to agree on the content of the faith without an objective authority that can define what that content is.
Right.
And if 500 years of Protestantism has shown us anything, it's that outside of an objective religious authority that can define the contours of Christian faith, the Bible alone is absolutely not sufficient to bring about that outcome, because that's not what it was given for. The Bible was never given to us or intended by God to be the final or sufficient rule of faith for the church. Christ entrusted that job to the church's sacred magisterium. So, yes, I agree with you. We ought not to be divided into denominations. But B, I disagree with you that eliminating sacred tradition of the magisterium will somehow accomplish that. I mean, history has proven quite the contrary.
Yeah. Steve, thank you so much for your email. Here's one now from John, who says, Dr. Anders, as you well know, the Catholic Church puts an awful lot of emphasis on the presumed importance of Mary, the mother of Jesus? With that being the case, why does she appear or disappear rather from Scripture after Acts chapter 1? Wouldn't someone that important be mentioned at least as frequently as the other disciples? Thanks, John.
Yeah, if you brought that principle to bear on the examination of every facet of Christian faith, you would find that the vast majority of Protestant faith would vanish evanescently like smoke.
Yeah.
Okay, because Scripture fails to mention the lion's share of what we think and do and believe and practice as Christians. All right, and let me give you an example. Do you think it's important that women receive Holy Communion?
Of course.
Where is that ever mentioned in the New Testament? Nowhere. It's never mentioned. I mean, that's just one of countless examples. The problem with your question, the premise of the question, is that somehow or another the Scriptures are supposed to be a sufficient rule of faith for the church, and they're not, and they were never intended to be that.
Okay. Thank you so much for your question, John. Let's go now to Haas in North Fork, Nebraska, listening today on YouTube. Hey there, Haas. What's on your mind today?
Not much, guys. I just wanted to ask a simple question, I hope, about evil.
Okay.
So, God created everything, and I believe in that. But I guess I don't want to say that God created evil, but I would like to say you can't know something's good without experiencing evil. You can't know something without its opposite. Like, you can't know man without woman. But people have told me that it's a creation of our original sin. But are we creations of God, and then our creations are God's creations, just in a longer process? Like, if I make something, isn't that God's creation already?
I understand what you're saying. So, Haas, what's the opposite of an avocado?
Nothing.
Right, exactly. Not non-being. There really is no such thing as the opposite, not avocado, okay? And so I point that out because I disagree with the premise of the question. I don't think it's necessary to know the opposite of a thing in order to appreciate its intrinsic goodness. I'm thinking about avocados today because I like them and I kind of want to eat one. There's no opposite of an avocado, and I don't need to know the opposite of an avocado in order to know that avocados are good. Okay, and so it's not necessary to know non-being in order to know the goodness of being or to know the goodness of God. Okay. Now, with respect to the second question about the origin of sin and the origin of evil, the Catholic position is, first of all, that evil itself is non-being. All right, there's not a substance in the universe that we call evil. It's not like you have matter over here and that's good, or you have people and they're good, and then there's this squishy thing that floats around that gets into is called evil. Evil's not a thing. All right, evil is simply the word we use to describe the action of the freely chosen action of a moral agent, of a rational moral agent, who chooses some lesser good over a greater good. So, for instance, I like avocados, but what if I chose an avocado in preference to my wife? All right, if I said, I can either eat this avocado or I can save my wife from falling off a cliff, I think I'll eat the avocado. Okay, well, my wife is a good and that avocado is a good, but she's a much greater good. And if I chose the lesser good over the greater good, that's what we call evil. Okay, and you don't have to look any further for the origin of evil than just the capacity of rational agents to freely deliberate between goods and to make a preferential choice for one over the other. That's where the origin of evil comes from. Now, as to the elaboration, can we somehow implicate God in that, since God's providence is in control of everything? Well, the way the Church understands that is to differentiate God's primary causality from his secondary causality. Okay, and one of the absolute bedrock philosophical convictions of the Catholic Church is that God makes use of secondary causality. All right, and it's in this way that he's separated in terms of moral responsibility from the commission of evil, because that arrives from the free actions of individual rational agents, not from God directly. All right. Also, it's what preserves the integrity of natural science and philosophy and the rational integrity of the universe, because since God makes use of secondary causes, we can investigate those secondary causes rationally through empirical science. It's one of the reasons why the scientific revolution occurred in the Latin Catholic West and not in the Islamic world, because Muslim philosophers denied the reality of secondary causality, instead took the position that you're taking, namely that God acts directly and causes everything immediately. Catholic Church denies that, does make use of secondary causality, and that way preserves his own moral innocence, as well as ceding a kind of autonomy and integrity to the natural order that can be rationally investigated.
Hoss, thank you so much for your question. Glad that you're watching us today on YouTube. And Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Tom.
Remember that we do the program each and every Monday through Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern here on EWTN Radio. And then we also play the best of the week on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern. I'm Tom Price. Have a great day. We'll have another great show for you next time here on EWTN. God bless.